Hey everyone, quite some time ago I made a video on solo PvPing and ganking hard flagged in the red zone, and it's a good video, but it is very outdated. The game has changed a lot since then, and not a lot of the information is still super relevant. So in this video, I'm basically going to be remaking that video, revisiting going solo in the red zone, hard flagging up, doing some ganking and PvP, and how you can be successful at it. Now, really quickly before we get into things, solo PvPing has become a lot more specialized over the recent years in the sense that you can't take as general of an approach. So rather than just going through everything, there are sort of 4 specific distinct types of solo PvP you can do in the red zone, which are baiting fights, invis ganking, dismount ganking, and dungeon diving. They do somewhat bleed into each other, but usually you want to focus and specifically go with your build and playstyle towards one of these specific things. I'm going to cover all of them very briefly, but the vast majority of this video is going to be spent on invis ganking, simply because in my opinion, it's just sort of the best one to do. The others can be good and you can have a lot of fun and success, but there are definitely some significant problems with them, which I'll cover, and then we'll take a deep dive into invis ganking in the red zone. So starting us off with dismount ganking, this style of ganking is all about finding players who are mounted, forcefully dismounting them, and then killing them afterwards. In order to do this effectively, you need a high tier, very aggressive, high damage build. This bear paw build is basically the only one that's realistically run for this style. For your playstyle, you're basically just picking a spot in the map where you think will have at least some traffic. You run around dismounted and then you just sprint at and do as much damage to people on their mounts as possible, dismounting them and then purging off their boots with your fiend cowl and killing them afterwards. The biggest problem with this style of ganking is that it's very high risk and the reward usually isn't too high. You have to run around dismounted, which means you're in more danger. You need very high tier gear or high IP to actually be able to dismount people. Your build needs to be focused on damage rather than survivability. You can't really afford to put too much survivability in the build. And even with all of that, you still can't really dismount the tanky like transport mounts. So your targets are still mostly going to be random solo players that aren't that valuable most of the time. So really what you end up with is you take a lot of risk into yourself, and most of the time you're not really killing 2 valuable targets, so you're not getting that much reward. If you do like this style, it can be very fun, but I would suggest going into the black zone instead of the red zone, as it's a little bit better in there. Next on the list is baiting fights. This is mostly just running around and baiting other people blueberries in the red zone to dismount and try to fight you. The thing you have to understand about this though is that blueberries, random blue players in the red zone, will only really dismount and fight you if they are very confident that they can win. What this means is that you'll often be fighting outnumbered. They'll wait for their friends to show up before they try to fight you, and it's best done in very low tier gear with high specialization, because the newer players that are typically going to be dismounting on you trying to fight you are going to overemphasize the tier of gear and underemphasize stuff like skill and spec. So it's easiest to be done in 4.1 gear that you're really good with, really experienced with, and have high specialization on. Baiting fights like this in 4.1 in red zones is definitely a ton of fun. It can be a ton of fun. Sometimes it's frustrating, but it is one of my favorite activities in the game. However, it's very low reward. Since you're going to be in very low tier gear and you're mostly going to be killing more inexperienced players, you're probably not going to get that many really big kills. You can definitely get some, but they're very few and far between. So it's more better for just having fun and especially learning specific styles of PvP, like the 1vx, learning how to take 1v2s and 1v3s. Next we have dungeon diving. I was debating whether to include this one or not because it's kind of dead, but it still can be okay. Really, this is just going into random solo dungeons throughout the red zone and checking if they have people in them and trying to kill them if they are inside of them. Now, the vast majority of people wait the 90 seconds for a solo dungeon to close at the start. So the way you have to do this is you have to enter every dungeon unflagged or faction flagged or something, and then leave, re-enter 90 seconds later just before it closes for a second time, and they'll often not realize that by you entering and leaving that you've reset the timer, so they'll be going in and they'll clear the dungeon, then you can flag up and go and kill them. Either that or do it in a duo, which makes it much easier. One of you can go inside and one of you can stay outside, and it's much easier to kill people. The reason this isn't too good is because it's just really hard to find someone in a killable position in a solo dungeon. It's going to take quite a long time, you're going to need a lot of patience. Again, you can get some very big kills, but most of the time it's just not super rewarding because it just takes too long to find realistic targets. If you do want to know more about this, check out my scavenger challenge video. I did do quite a lot of this during the scavenger challenge. Last but not least, we have Invis Ganking. I'm just going to give a quick introduction here, as the entire video past this point is going to be focused on Invis Ganking, solo Invis Ganking in the red zone, but it's basically just about finding players out in the red zone who are doing some activity, catching them without their mounts, and then killing them. Typically, the way we're going to do this is by going invisible before they can see you at the edge of their screen, closing the distance, and then tagging them so they lose their mounts. Before I get started on this section, did you know that I have a Patreon where you can help support me further to see more videos like this? And it has some cool benefits like giving you a custom Discord role on my channel to talk to me and getting to see videos 24 hours early? Well, now you do, and you should totally do that, or just click subscribe. That helps me out too. Taking a look at builds, you don't have to go one specific build for this style of ganking. Really, all you need is 4 things that your build must have: stealth, mobility, damage, and a purge. Let's start with a purge because it's probably the most important. Really, you just need a way to remove their boots. If you let them boots away from you, they're going to escape. So especially if you get on top of them with mobility, then you need a way to stay on top of them without them just escaping, so you need to purge their boots. Usually this is done with a fiend cowl, but it can also be done with like a cripple for spear, not technically a purge, but it fulfills the same function, a helmet of valor, or really any other purge. That being said, the fiend cowl is just simply the best and the easiest to use. Now, just quickly to note, you can definitely gank without a purge as well, but you're going to need quite high mobility on your build, and it's also going to be less reliable. So it's definitely possible and you can have a lot of success, but if possible, I would definitely take a purge. Next is stealth, and this is also fundamentally important to this style of ganking because you need to use stealth to get on top of people without them noticing you, so you can tag them before they mount up. There are 2 main items that you can use to do this. 1 is an assassin jacket and 2 is invisibility potions. So starting with assassin jacket has the downside that its invisibility breaks after you go a certain range away from where you casted it. So when you use this to gank, you use it on the edge of somebody's screen, but it will break the invis before you can get on top of them. For this reason, if you're going to use the assassin jacket, you need to bring a weapon that either has mobility that can get on top of them very quickly, or range that can tag them after your invis breaks. So you'll use your invis on the edge of their screen, and then it will break when you're sort of maybe halfway towards them. You're going to have to either use a ranged ability right away to tag them, or use the mobility ability right away to get on top of them and then tag them. The benefit of an assassin jacket though is simply that you don't have to use an invisibility potion, which costs around 11k I think per potion, which means 11k per gank attempt. So typically, if you're just going in really low tier cheap sets, I'd suggest just going with the assassin jacket, and you can forego the invis potion, assuming you're using a weapon that can actually capitalize on it. Invis potions, on the other hand, last for quite a long time, allowing you to get right on top of your target without having to use any abilities at all. However, along with the price tag on them, they also have a little bit of a cast animation on them before you go into Invis, which gives people just a fraction of a second longer to see you before you go Invis, meaning they have a slightly better chance of seeing you. Typically, I'll go with both an assassin jacket and an invisibility potion. That's my favorite one to do. I can choose which one to use depending on the situation, or if I'm going in a cheap set, I'll just take an assassin jacket. Next on the build essentials is mobility. You typically want at least a little bit of mobility to stay on top of targets so you can keep damaging them, or at the very least some crowd control, which basically has the same effect, just affecting them instead of you. The 2 main reasons mobility is so important is 1, gatherers, who are a common target for you, almost always have high mobility weapons, so it's a lot easier if you do as well, help you stay on top of them much easier. And number 2 is that high mobility builds are much safer. The more mobility you have, the better you are at running away, and you're going to be doing a lot of running away. Last but not least of the build essentials is damage. Obviously you need damage to kill people, but it's more than that. You really want high damage. Killing people fast is quite important. 1 is because there's a lot of safe areas in the red zones, like zone outs and faction outposts and all that other stuff. There's lots of areas close to people that they can escape, so the faster you kill them, the better. Similarly, the longer you take killing someone, the more danger you're in, giving time for their friends to show up or just other random people to show up and all gang up on you, the sorry lonely red. So the less time you spend trying to kill a target, the better. You can also go for a weapon that has damage and crowd control to sort of have a similar effect. It slows down people who are trying to escape or get to safe areas, allowing you to sort of kill them before they get there. Even if it takes you a little bit longer, it's still a decent option. And then there's also weapons with just pure raw damage, no mobility, no CC. You can use these as well, and they can be quite good, but you can just use things like soldier boots in place of the mobility or the CC to stay on top of people. Also, a last note here when choosing a weapon is that you want a weapon that can deal damage while moving. Your build can have all the mobility or crowd control in the world, but if you need to stand still to do your damage, you're not really going to be able to consistently damage people as they're running away. You need to be able to consistently damage them while they're running away, so use weapons that can deal damage on the move. Here's just a general list of weapons that I think are quite good for doing solo red zone Invis ganking. And just to note, this is definitely a non-exhaustive list. These are just sort of off the top of my head. There are definitely many, many more weapons that can be very successful. For finishing up your build and putting it all together, like the rest of your build, really the rest of your items is going to depend on what you've gone with, but there's some notes to keep in mind. First, make sure you have enough energy if need be. Some weapons are very energy heavy, and so you need to make sure you have something in your build that gives you energy. Typically, this can be like the sprint on the cloth shoes giving you energy, or a cape like a Limhurst cape is also a good option. Another good option is that if you're using a weapon with high mobility, or really a build with high mobility, shoes with refreshing sprint, so any leather shoes are a great option because they lower all of your other cooldowns as well as their own, meaning your mobility rotations come up faster. Similarly, using omelets as a food is also good for mobility builds for the same reason. For capes, you really have sort of two options. Undead cape is like the ultimate best safety cape. It is so good. I can't tell you how many times undead cape has saved me. It's very expensive, so I wouldn't use it unless you're going really high tier gear, but it's very, very good for safety. If you don't want to go the undead cape route, then you can either go the Limhurst cape for mana or really any damage or crowd control cape. They all do fine. If you're looking for just a straight up example build, here is the one-handed spear build that I most prefer and have used for a very, very long time. So whenever I talk about ganking, I constantly get the questions of how much IP do I need to gank, so we're dedicating an entire section to it. Red Zone solo ganking is all about finding people in unfortunate situations and capitalizing on that and killing them. What IP does for you and what it gives you in a solo red zone ganking trip is it determines how unfortunate of a situation somebody has to be in before you're able to kill them. So let's say you go literally completely naked with 0 IP. You could still kill someone if they, for example, were doing open world mobs, they killed it and then they died to its bleeds and they're just sitting there waiting to get back up. You can run over and execute them. That's an unfortunate situation that you don't need any IP to take advantage of. Let's say you come across two people having a 1v1 and you can look to third party and kill one of the guys. Well, you can't do that if you're naked, but if you have some tier 4 gear and a little bit of IP, you can probably go in and kill one of them. If you're running full 8.4 Masterpiece with max spec, if somebody walks too close to you when they're mounted, you can probably just dismount them and kill them. Really, all IP does is it increases the amount of potential targets that you have. Can you be successful solo ganking in the red zone with 700 IP on every piece of gear? Absolutely you can. It's going to take a really long time for you to find someone that's actually killable for you, and so your profits are probably going to be pretty low, but it's definitely possible you can still get successful ganks off and still have a lot of fun. For a really good experience, or sort of like an optimal experience though, I would suggest aiming for an IP between 900 and 1400 on every piece of gear, ideally with a plus 100 IP on your weapon. This will give you a pretty good amount of targets to kill without having to go so expensive in gear sets that you're going to attract tons of attention or lose a lot when you die. Similarly to IP, some people might be put off by some of the cost of the gear. So a Fiend Cowl, for example, is an example I gave of a really important piece of gear for your build, but it is quite expensive compared to other gear at really low tiers. Like if you want to go in 4.1, it can be really expensive. Again, it's going to do the same thing that higher IP would. You can definitely kill people, you can definitely gank people without a Fiend Cowl, without going those more expensive items, but it is definitely going to lower the amount of potential kills that you can get. So really all of this is to say that if you're interested in solo red zone ganking, just go ahead and give it a try. No matter what stage of the game you're at, no matter how much spec or money you have, just go out with a set of gear that you're willing to lose and see if you enjoy it. Okay, so when you're out in the red zone doing your solo ganking, you are going to meet a lot of very different people that are out there for very different reasons. And you need to ideally be able to instantly identify as soon as you inspect somebody what they are out there doing. Because in an environment where literally everybody is your enemy, every second matters. Whether that's identifying a group that's going to gank you as soon as possible and turning around to run away, or identifying a possible target and dismounting just in time to catch them, you need to be able to inspect someone, instantly know what they're doing, and have the correct reaction as soon as possible. So for the types of people you will see in the red zone, I'm separating them into 3 categories: people that want to kill you, people who you want to kill or your targets, and then just other people that aren't really going to affect you too much. So starting with the most dangerous group and the people that want to kill you, first and foremost are blueberry gank groups. These are the most dangerous people to you in the red zone. Blueberry gankers are people that form up in large groups, do not hard flag, and specifically run out looking for hard flag players and trying to gank them with very high catch gear. Honestly, these players are one of the main things that makes solo red zone ganking fairly difficult. The only thing you really have going for you is that these players are almost always noobs, and so they're pretty bad at the game. So if you're pretty confident in your escaping skills, you should be able to escape from them in most of the situations. When you come across a blueberry ganker, just instantly go into escape mode, try to get out, try to lose them. They will follow you and chase you for quite a long time, so it's best to just lose them as fast as possible, like going into a Road of Avalon or something like that. Next on the list of people who want to kill you, we have a general group that I'm just going to call fighters. Basically, these are people that are just out going into the red zone that are specifically looking to do some PvP activity. Mostly this will be corrupted dungeoners that you have to watch out for, but it also includes things like Hellgate teams. Typically, these people won't bug you all too much if you don't bug them first, so don't give them any opportunities to kill you and they'll probably leave you alone pretty quickly. Also, if you're looking for a fight, be very careful about these people because they're always in like very strong meta PvP builds, so it's going to be a tough fight. Last but not least, on the list of people that want to kill you, we have other hard flagged players. Now, most other hard flagged players will be running in groups, so you can get a sense for the group size by checking out the hostile counter. Really, the vast majority of the time though, they're going to be in groups too large for you to really mess with, and they're going to want to kill you. So for other hard flag players, you typically just want to avoid them, as lots of other hard flags in the map is both bad for being dangerous for you and bad for ganking because the blues will be on more high alert. Looking at the targets list now, people who you want to kill, the by far biggest group, the vast majority of your targets are open world farmers. So this is mainly gatherers and also people doing open world mobs or farming ghost towns, things like that. Really though, it just refers to anybody who's out in the open world doing some activity. Also on this list, I'm going to add people doing solo dungeons. You typically won't be going for them too much as they're not usually super gankable, but you can get them if you can. They can be good targets. In the others group, people that you're going to see around but won't really mess with you and you don't really want to mess with them. Starting us off, we have group fame farmers, so anyone doing like group dungeons or static dungeons. Those groups, typically they might try to kill you if you present yourself as an opportunity to them, but mostly they'll just ignore you and you definitely can't kill them. Similarly, there's also faction groups. This is especially prevalent around bandit assault. Faction groups, again, they'll definitely try to kill you if you go and investigate them and sort of hang around, but if you leave them alone, again, they usually won't go out of their way to try to kill you. Also on this list is transporters. Would be an amazing group of people to kill because they're super juicy and loaded with loot, but there's no way that you can kill a transporter solo. I mean, even the cheapest, squishiest transport mounts are just not dismountable for a solo player. And last but not least, we just have other people, random people. There are so many people in the red zone that I look at them and I have absolutely no idea what they're doing there. These sort of random people fit into all their groups. They'll definitely look to try to kill you, but there also can be some pretty good targets as well. So you mainly have to just go with your gut feeling on them. They might have a group, they might not have a group, they might have decent PvP skills, they might not. You never really know, you just kind of gotta go with your gut on these ones. Okay, the next thing you need to know to be successful in solo ganking in the red zone is the different zones and what you're most likely to find inside of them. If you pick any two random zones in the red zone, there's a good chance there's going to be completely different amount of people and types of people in those zones. If you don't know which zones to go for as a solo ganker, you're going to have vastly different levels of success. So let's go over some of the different types of zones, ones you want to stay away from and ones you want to focus on. So first up, we have the 4 zones that are directly adjacent to Caerleon. These zones are ones that you highly want to avoid as a solo ganker. These zones are mostly populated by people that are just going out of Caerleon to do some quick content in the surrounding area, mainly things like corrupted dungeons and hellgates and solo dungeons. Some of those people are okay, but just the amount of people that are in these zones is very high, too high for you to be able to comfortably kill somebody in peace. And the majority of players in those zones, or a higher majority than in other zones, are experienced players with good PvP builds. So really, those zones are very dangerous. You typically just want to never go inside of them. Next on the list are the zones that are closest to the royal cities. So no royal cities are directly connected to red zones, but they all have a red zone that's closest to them, usually accessible by going through one yellow zone and then through a tunnel, and you get to that red zone. These red zones are some of the best ones for you to play in and the best ones to solo ganking. The reasons for this is, one, they have pretty decent traffic. You want enough traffic that you'll be able to find targets, but not so much that it's going to overwhelm you and you're not going to be able to kill people in peace. These zones typically have a perfect level of traffic, enough people to find, but not so much that it's hard to kill people. Also, they have a lot of people that are there to do things like Fame Farm and Gather, which are your perfect targets. So you have a lot of targets in those zones. And then lastly, they also often have these gathering hotspots or other hotspots in them, which can be a good source to find people as well. Really, these are your perfect zones to go solo ganking in the red zone in. I basically always start at one of these zones and only really leave if I have to. Other good zones, if you do get kicked out of one of those zones closest to a royal city, are zones with hotspots. So really, there's 2 types of hotspots that are the most important or valuable to you. One are the ones with the gathering node hotspots, the ones with just have a high density of a particular type of gathering resource, and then second are the ghost towns. These both will have very good targets with you who are going to be dismounted, doing things, they'll have loot on them. They really are the perfect targets, so those little hotspots are amazing ones to go and look to gank. Now, one note on these, I've done a lot of red zone ganking, checked a lot of these hotspots. For whatever reason it is, the wood hotspots never ever have anybody in them. All the other gathering ones have consistently found people in, but the wood ones, I don't think I've ever found somebody actually in them. So I don't know what that's about. Maybe you'll try and have better luck than me, but the other ones definitely do have people in them, and the ghost towns again are super populated. Next is Camelin. I'm just putting it in here because it's a super unique zone. Basically, I don't have a lot to say about this, just avoid it. It is a dangerous zone, it's not good for solo ganking. Just avoid Camelin, go around it or just go through it. Lastly, for sort of special zones, we have tier 7 zones. There are 2 tier 7 zones in the red zone, and these can both make some pretty decent ganking spots, as they'll have a slightly higher population than all the other random zones in the game, but typically not as good as those zones with hotspots or the ones closest to the royal city. So they can make good targets, they can have some pretty good people, especially doing solo dungeons if you want to focus on them a little bit more, but typically they're just going to be alright zones. Okay, so how do you actually gank people going into more detail now? Well, most of the people you are going to gank with the standard Invis ganking strategy. And there are really 4 steps to this. So first off is just simply finding a target. We'll talk a little bit more about this later, about how you find targets. And then second is sort of into the setting up on them, going from just off their screen, pressing an Invis potion or an assassin jacket right as you're at the edge of their screen, which lets you get closer to them for the step number 3, which is to tag them, basically hit them with any damaging ability before they can mount up. If you're using an assassin jacket, you're going to want to go for this tag as soon as you exit stealth, because they'll have a little bit of distance in between you and them. So use any mobility or range to get on top of them and tag them as soon as you possibly can. And then if you're using the Invis potion, you can wait until you're right on top of them, unless they're just finishing up gathering a node or killing a mob and they might risk mounting up without even knowing you're there. Then you can sort of tag them a little bit early. After you've tagged them and their mount is no longer beside them, it basically just comes down to chasing them down and killing them. The vast majority of the time, this is going to be done by specifically looking out for purging their boots, getting that purge on their boots, and then simply just staying on top of them and killing them. One thing that can help a lot when it comes to seeing people quickly and then getting your Invis off quickly is not having all of the UI around your screen that covers the edges. By turning these parts of your UI off, it's a lot easier to see people, especially around like the weird corners of your screen, like the mini map or the top left-hand corner where your health is, as it can be a little hard to see name tags sort of behind those in the moment. So in the settings, there is a hotkey for something called recording mode. Basically, this takes off all of your UI except for your health bar, and it's really helpful to have it on a place where you can quickly toggle it on and off. I do it constantly now ever since I've learned about this, and it's very, very helpful. Personally, mine is bound on T, but really it can be bound to whatever you find easiest. Another thing that can help is for your first gank of the trip, it can be a lot easier if you don't hard flag in the city. So you exit as a blue and you're only going to flag up later. This allows you to find a good target without you scaring them off because you won't be red yet, allowing you to go just off of their screen, hard flag, and then gank them with invisibility. Now this won't always work. Often, in fact, they will get mounted. They'll finish what they're doing and they'll get mounted before you can all the way hard flag and get set up on them. But at least you'll know that there's somebody there who's a good target, what they're doing in the general area that they're in, so you can look to set up on them again. Last but not least for our playstyle, when you actually finally kill a target, there are a couple of mechanics that you have to be very aware of. So the first is death skulls. After any kill happens in a zone in Albion, red zone included, a skull will appear on the map showing someone died. Everybody sees this skull no matter if they are involved in the kill or not. In the red zone, 99% of blueberries, unflagged players are skull chasers. As soon as a skull appears on the map, they will run to it looking for some free loot or a free kill. What this means for you is as soon as you get a kill, you will be absolutely swarmed by blueberries. So it's really important that as soon as you successfully gank a target, that you're instantly looting and getting out of there as fast as possible so you don't get chased around by a massive zerg of blueberries. Another important mechanic that happens on death is the 2 minutes of loot protection. So after somebody dies, their body is protected from being looted by people, except for their killer, other people who damaged them significantly, and anyone else in their party. So if you solo gank and solo kill someone and they were not in a party, nobody can loot that body except for you for 2 minutes. So if you kill somebody and it's a little bit hot around the body, you can leave, sort of soak around and come back in like a minute or so and see if the people are gone, as they often will be. Just a note, if you are doing like the baiting fight strategy in 4.1, this is an extra important mechanic to keep in mind because you can actually purposely suicide after a death and then come back if it's in a rough situation where you wouldn't be able to loot and survive. Okay, so along with your general playstyle, there are some tips and tricks and helpful stuff that I have picked up along the way that can really help you succeed in solo ganking. So first up is keeping track of save points. So the 3 main save points that blues have from you in the red zone are 1, Roads of Avalon, 2, zone exits, and 3, faction outposts. If they make it to any one of these save points, it's basically impossible for you to kill them. So whenever you enter a zone, it's really important that you know where all of these save points are and you keep track of them. Open the map, look at the map, see how many save points there are and what areas of the map they're in, because faction outposts can be anywhere. Roads of Avalon spawn in sort of random locations, as it will give you a decent idea of if that zone is good to gank, and more specifically what parts of the zone are good to gank. Ideally, you want to roam around in a place on a specific map that isn't too close to any save points. Now, it's often a little bit hard to find a balance because the save points in the map will usually be around the higher traffic areas, so you want to try to pick a balance between an area that doesn't have too many save points and an area that's still going to have a decent amount of people. And just a note here, while you don't typically want to gank too close to any save points, it's not necessarily something that you can't do, as a lot of people will panic really hard and make tons of mistakes while ganking them, giving you opportunities to kill them even when you should have no business realistically doing so. Next for tips, you'll notice in these clips that sometimes I start mounted and sometimes I start dismounted. And roaming mounted versus dismounted both have their benefits and weaknesses. There's no right or wrong way to go about things. I'd say it's more about personal preference, but I personally have found a nice balance that works for me. So I'm usually roaming mounted looking for targets unless I'm in a particularly good area. A good area being a spot on the map where there is likely to be a person there and there are no close escape points. This can also sort of be influenced not by just the area on the map, but also if there are things like mobs down and resources down. If everything is down, there's a really good chance someone is close because someone has just cleared those things. For example, the resource hotspots, like I touched on earlier, are a very common place that I go dismounted because they rarely have any safe points near them, and they're very likely to have a gatherer there. Similarly, in maps with bodies of water on them, they can also be really good because water is basically like a hotspot for fishers. So in areas where there's water and no safe points nearby, it's again really good to go dismounted. In terms of how you actually go about engaging a gank when you're mounted versus dismounted, well, when you're dismounted, as soon as you see someone, you just pop Invis right away and hope they didn't see you. If you are looking ahead of you where you're going, you're pretty likely to get the Invis off before they can see you. When going mounted, on the other hand, you sort of have two options. One is that you can sort of turn back quickly and hope they didn't see you and then set up for the Invis, or maybe like ride past them, pretend you're not interested and then set up for the Invis if you think they saw you. Or the second option is if they are killing mobs, you can try to get them in combat and despawn them out just by riding on top of any of their AoE attacks. Or sometimes you can just ride close to them and dismount and hope the mob stops them from mounting up long enough for you to get a hit in. So obviously the benefit of being dismounted already is it gives you a much better chance of ganking someone. You can just go Invis right away and you're basically set up right away. But the downside is that when you are dismounted, you are moving slower, you're covering less distance, so you're much less likely to find people, and just being dismounted makes you in a much more vulnerable position. If a gank group rolls up on you, it's much harder to escape if you're not already mounted. So really, I'd suggest trying both approaches out and seeing which one you sort of prefer. Next on the list of tips is actually in your sound settings. So in Albion, you can hear things slightly further away than you can see things. So if you have your sound effects clearly audible, you can actually hear people like clearing mobs off your screen without even seeing their name tag or them seeing your name tag. This is pretty much only used for people doing open world mobs, as like gatherers don't make too much sound unless they're killing like a gathering mob, but there are definitely some kills that I've gotten specifically because I could hear them before I can see them. My settings are basically set up like I only have effect sounds on. They're the only thing that comes through my game sound, but again, for you, depending on what you prefer, just make sure your effect sounds are clearly hearable. Next, make sure that you avoid tunnels. When you're hard flagged, tunnels are a death sentence. When you enter a tunnel as a hard flag, often there won't be anyone there to kill you and it won't really matter, but if there is a group inside and they want to kill you and they see one hard flag and that hostile kind of there and they decide they want to kill you, there's not a whole lot you can do except just die. So if you don't really care about dying too much, you can chance the tunnels because they sometimes cut down on travel time a bit. But when you're doing a very challenging activity like solo ganking in the red zone, you want to make sure you're using every death as a learning experience. And unfortunately, deaths in tunnels aren't really that helpful in terms of a learning experience. There's often nothing you really could have done better except avoiding the tunnel in the first place. Another tip that can help you stay safe is keeping in mind the location of Avalonian portals in maps that you are ganking in. I mentioned earlier how Avalonian portals are a safe point for people you're trying to gank. Well, that kind of stands for you too. They're also good safe points for you. This is especially true around faction flagged groups, as when you're faction flagged, you cannot enter the Avalonian portals before you deflag, so faction flagged players will never follow you in there. They are the best escape when you're getting chased by a faction group. Another decent escape to add to this is group dungeons. If you ever see group dungeons around, keep their location in mind in case you need a quick getaway. Since you're generally going to have Invis in your build, you're pretty good at surviving inside of group dungeons, and so it's generally unwise for people to chase you, so they'll usually leave you alone. Last but not least for tips, when you kill people in the red zone, you lose reputation, and so I thought I should add in the best ways to farm back your reputation so that you don't get stuck in the black zone. Now, farming reputation is really fast when you're very low reputation, but gets a lot slower when you approach that 0 reputation mark. So I would suggest basically when you get around like negative 15k rep, that's when you kind of want to start slowing down on the ganking and going more into farming reputation. Make sure you don't reach that 20k. And then once you get down to around negative 3k rep, it's not really as important to farm reputation because it will take significantly longer than when you were lower reputation. In terms of the best activities to do to get your reputation up fast, the absolute best way is to solo static dungeons out in the red zone, followed similarly by soloing group dungeons, and then lastly, for a more easier and more accessible way that I would suggest most people do, is just to farm open world mobs. I'd suggest even doing this when you're ganking, when you have some downtime, you're not actively looking for targets, maybe waiting for your outlaw timer or something. You can sort of just passively manage your reputation by killing random mobs. Okay, that is all for this video. I know it's long. I tried to make it as concise as possible. I hope you enjoyed this and found it helpful. If you did, do all the stuff you do to YouTube videos, and I will see you in the next one.